That's good, and there we go. Hmm. Hello to my viewers. How are you doing? I am good. I'm out of a malaise, which is good. I also look extremely different. Oh boy. I have to say, getting carried literally by the jaw does not seem like it'd be very comfortable. could really use a ring or something to increase my item level to get up to heroic. That would be appreciated.
like you say, people will choose whatever to fit their way.
Yeah, and nobody wants to. It's very, and this is why, if you market really well, people will believe you. People will say, oh, I actually what you're saying to me because this looks really good. I just need a lot of features, and it doesn't necessarily like right out the box or something as like gaming, for instance. Gaming is this masculine man, and I know you guys have a conversation, for instance, which I found about this. Jack
that person and then saying, why do you think what you think? This is what we think is a group. Are you willing to listen and then change your opinions rather than kind of be like,
I mean, yeah,
get out and then I feel like sometimes you can be like get out and then you almost push them further into the darkness rather than being like let's have a conversation. This is our opinion. Let's kind of try and figure it out. Or are you going to?
Absolutely, no, absolutely. I was shortening it because there was a whole procedure to this. But
I didn't mean to do that because I mean
in general, yeah.
natural just walk off, get away from it rather than have that conversation and see maybe change someone's opinion.
There are many approaches to combating issues and many right?
Well, Ad, it's not about becoming famous. It is about creating content that people will enjoy and that it's hard to take off until I have the ability to make money with it and can pay for more things. So, power to you for keeping by, but incorrect assumption. Better change my podcast episode. There we go.
This is a podcast project by Michael Mann and Paul Twine. We've recently released a brand new gift set. The gift set contains a 25 CL bottle of mead. You have a choice from 3 flavours, including our brand new spice mead. As well as that, you get a small rustic drinking bowl. Both are displayed in a nice little gift box. So head over to the website, paultwine.com, to grab yourself one. Also, keep an eye out, as we're adding more items and gift sets over the next month. On top of that, we give listeners of the podcast up to 10% off the discount code HORNS10. So remember to use the code HORNS10 at checkout. Alright, let's jump to the show.
What do you mean, what's wrong with my audio? There's nothing wrong with my audio. Oh, yeah. That's because I'm listening to a podcast. I don't know. I can turn it on and you can listen to it. Also, hey, what's up?
Three sides. On one is a depiction of Christ, and on the other one is a depiction of a great beast Moses, which is some kind of lion or wolf battling a serpent or snake, and on the third you have a runic text base. But it's more or less only the depiction of the great beast Moses that carries through to the Swedish runestones.
Yeah, I think if I may kick in a dimension to that, I think what we're dealing with here is obviously a non-literate society, and that means that they will be handling. They're familiar with literacy to an extent, and with letters, of course, because they're carving runes. But they're treating them much differently from us, for instance, because
it's probably my computer itself.
Raised with text. These people weren't raised with text; they were raised with imagery and landscape. That would be some of the things that they would be familiar with when they were sort of in the visual part of the mind. So I think that might be part of the reason that the beast motif is the thing that people are focusing on and carrying through.
Well, hello, how are you?
The text component, for instance.
And yeah.
This is just, again...
It's not that I shaved, it's that I completely...
But to me, it looks like when we have rune carvings
left the entirety of my...
in mind,
I lost my hair. That's the best way to say it. Oh my gosh.
A holistic image, and composing a holistic image that has a relationship to the shape that he's using. I say he, it could be she, but and also
God, we should have cleared out the
shape
mobs.
Itself, having some kind of relationship to the landscape is pretty. That's how I'm sort of reading these rune texts. It's not just about the text itself; it's about the entire image. And I think that that's kind of awesome because it looks like we have like a window into what I would call an oral mind, right? An oral visual mind rather than a reading mind. Which also gives us a lot to understanding a lot of the literature actually that has oral background. So yeah, that's my
well, that's cool
thing.
So Matthias, on that, so you see a lot of the Swedish runestones are text-based, and I guess there's quite a lot of them are almost gravestone styles. They've got a message for somebody who died in battle. Is it likely that the person who had that commission is able to read? And why would they not go for an image-based one rather than a text-based, if that makes sense? Obviously, I mean, these stones are pretty. They still do have artwork within them. Even they are. You still have like the knotwork of the beasts, but there is.
Oh my gosh, Tink! Why did you pull the flippin' boss?
So there's a couple of things that I've noted at least. We have those very intricate carvings where runes appear, for instance, inside of a snake form, or in context of some kind of more organic form. And one way of
heal me, fuckers!
Then we also have those really interesting ones that are just like text all over a surface. The one on what is it called again? I'm blanking on the name.
Yeah, me too. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, the nice big one that's just full of text. We also have the Erland stone, which I can't remember which one, but it commemorates a chieftain who owned land in Denmark or something like that, and it has a little bit of poetry on it. That one is also just like text surface, right? And it's very obvious that to me, it's very obvious that the carvers, they aren't accustomed to dealing with organizing text, and it's very different from what we see in the Yelling stone, where definitely they know what they're doing when they're putting these the text up in these nice lines that look almost as if you just opened the book, basically. So that's what I've noted about all of this, and yeah, I just find it incredibly fascinating because it means that I can look at what a oral mind is creating here, in terms of stories and narratives, as they're working with text as well, and slowly becoming more literate.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking of. Is would the average person be able to read the stone? You're going down that text through. If you've got a stone that is one full side of text, who's the benefit for if it's mainly an illiterate? Yeah.
So let me just throw out some numbers here because that's really interesting to consider. We have some 150 runestones from Norway. Approximately, maybe between 130 and 150 as far as I remember. They are, some of them are actually quite old, from the 500s. That's the case for Sweden and Denmark too, but there's actually a very low number of runestones from Norway. Denmark has 450 something as far as I remember, somewhere in that ballpark, and Sweden has more than 3,000. if I'm not mistaken.
Sounds right.
So, and in scholarship, we tend to divide by the year 1000. So anything pre the year 1000 we call sort of like the era of Danish dominance when it comes to runestones, and after that, the era of Swedish dominance. A lot of Swedish runestones are connected directly to Christianization in different ways. They're often announcing that somebody
How's life?
or that somebody is
Unless you already left.
for
I don't know.
Christian purpose. That happens a lot in Utland. And it looks like the church was actually promoting that local magnates would build bridges to basically improve the infrastructure. And this is also actually interesting when it comes to the Yellingstone, because it's kind of a similar thing that's happening here. We have Harold Bluetooth building the Ravning Enge Bridge, which is a huge bridge across this floodplain towards the Yelling complex that he's building too. So there's a lot of things going on with that. But so the question is, like, the average person, were they able to understand these runes? And I doubt that the average person in Viking Scandinavia around Harold Bluetooth's time would be able to read runes. I think it is more likely after the year 1000 that the average person would be able to read runes and carve them themselves. But still, in his time, it looks like it's connected more to individual specialists and the elite of society. It looks like with the very early runestones that we see, the ones from
Finally!
That is a very small percentage of the population who know how to carve and read runes. But we see sort of like an explosion in the capacity to understand rune writing towards the 1300s. The interesting thing is, the interesting example is Bergen in Bergen in Norway, where we have thousands of little messages that people have just been sending to each other, just carving little rune messages to each other. Some are insults, some are grocery lists, all those kinds of things. So there, it looks like runes sort of like become, Bergen at least is an example of how we could understand the development of rune script in Scandinavia in general. It looks like runes become sort of like the everyman's written language, whereas the Latin alphabet, on the other hand, is very much tied to church and official business. And the other example of this is Codex Unicus from Denmark, which is a description of the border between Denmark and Sweden. It contains a legal list of the Danish kings. We have the Scandinavian law in there, and we have a little song. Right? Then this is all written in runes in a book. One of the few books that are written entirely in runes from the medieval period. And this sort of suggests to me that at that point we've reached also a point where if you want something to be accessible to the average person in terms of text, writing it in runes is probably better than writing it in the Latin alphabet, because it's only those who have gone through schooling in the church institutions who are reading that alphabet. So yeah, the question is then, what does it mean to put runes on something, right?
Yeah.
A rune stone back in Harold Bluetooth's time. And when you do that, when you put runes on a big fat stone like that, then you're basically demonstrating to everybody that you have a powerful capacity. And if you're capable of reading these runes in the middle of the 900s, right, then I'm sure people will be like, wow, this person has some sort of like initiate knowledge that only few people have. Right? This is also what's reflected in the mythology.
So it's a show of power almost.
I think so, yeah.
So, Jonas, how much does your architecture background come into what you do now with the art? I mean, I'm more thinking just as we got onto runestones. Obviously, they are kind of like a physical, tangible thing. It's not just a piece of art on a piece of paper or a flat thing. They're in some capacity like a 3D kind of monolith almost. So, does the architecture play a part in that kind of looking at them?
I think it does, and I think it's something that comes natural or is obvious to me, or that I take for granted with my background in architecture, maybe. Because, and I think it ties very nicely into this conversation, because they have to be understood in their context. So you have to look at they were not a poster or something, how can I say it? They were landmarks. They were not something ephemeral. They were meant to stand there and to take space and to be the space in a way. And regarding the art on it, when Matthias was talking, I was thinking you can kind of look at them, at the motifs like, in a sense, like modern logos, that you have this very, you might not understand the text, but at least you have a clear reference to the image. And I think the way that they are so widely used, the same motifs in different ways, but the style really iterates the same kind of motifs over and over and over again. It kind of tells me that everybody knew what this was about. You didn't have to to translate it, or and that also ties into the way that the artwork were used in Viking Age Scandinavia and the role it played. And I'm not entirely sure how to talk about it, but at least in my understanding of it and my experience of it is that, and also maybe specifically in the way that it was used on the runestones, was to give it this kind of Scandinavian or Nordic identity. They might be Christian, absolutely they were Christian, and they made these landmarks to make that very, very clear that they were absolutely Christian. But at the same time, they had this essential Nordic way of delivering this message.
Yeah, that is 100% clear.
Not only in the artwork, but also in the way they were set out in the landscape.
Yeah. So I just want to throw one thing in there. So the motive that you call the beast on the Yellowstone, I actually don't think it's a beast, and this is my own personal theory, based off of indications that I've been seeing in a lot of weird materials. The Nordic mythology is one portion of it. Beowulf is another. Much later Danish magic charms written down in the 1700s also seem to suggest the same motif that it is active from maybe like the 400s, 500s, and then for the next 1,000+ years of the stag and the snake. I think that's what the beast motif actually is, and it's really interesting because it looks like this motif of the stag and the snake, or the stag and the dragon, ties into royal ideology in the Danish area. Go to Beowulf and Hrothgar's hall. It's called Herod, which means stag. That is threatened by some kind of like chthonic being that in some cases can also be a dragon. We have this in motif, as I mentioned, in magical charms, where it's just funny to see like a stag battling a snake for some reason. But how often does that happen in the Danish woods?
I haven't seen it.
So there are multiple other examples. There are multiple other artworks where it looks like this is active, and I think actually that's a very sort of like deeply rooted motif that keeps cropping up in different contexts.
So what's the origin of that, or what's the symbolism? Is it tied to the sagas, or where does it tie into, say, mythology or any other?
So in the mythology, we have it in the representation of the world tree, where you have the stags in the branches of the world tree, and you have the dragon beneath, and then you have an eagle above, which ties into other symbolism that is also important when it comes to eagle symbolism. This is Odin showing up as an eagle, and the eagle being an important bird of prey for rulers in Scandinavia at large. What we're dealing with, of course, when it comes to mythology is compounding myths and motifs and symbols. That's what the mythology usually does, right? If it rests on a 700 to 1,000-year-old tradition, we would expect to see a lot of like different symbols and motifs from different eras basically being built up together to what is now the mythology in the 15th century when it's being written down. But so that doesn't mean necessarily that just because we find this motif in say the description of the world tree passage, that it doesn't necessarily connects to the Danish royal house or anything like that. But it could be a motif that basically existed for so long in the culture that it makes sense to transpose it upon this. This is just like seeped into the myth of the world tree. This is my personal theory on this yelling motif, because it's so it looks like it's so common. I believe we've also found, and this is actually a relatively new discovery from Ripa in southern Denmark. For those who don't know, that presumably the oldest town in Scandinavia, where we have trade with the English area and the northern French coast, the Netherlands, and so on. Silver coins with that motif on it too. And if I'm not mistaken, they might be from like the middle of the 700s. I can't remember exactly. But it's just incredibly interesting and fascinating to consider that this is such a...
Yeah, absolutely. And I can recall several other from that time period with antlers, as animals with antlers. So it doesn't surprise me. And just to be clear, I actually don't have any idea of what that motif represents on the Yellowstone, or what that's supposed to be. I would hesitate to call it anything at all, because I'm not sure exactly how to trace it to anything directly, at least. Also because it builds, as far as I can see, on a several century long history of artwork and art history.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, from your artist perspective, whether that made sense, being a stag. Obviously, I have no idea.
Well, me neither. And I think that's a really good point because some of the things that, some of the questions that I often get is that, do you have any depictions of a bear? Do you have any depictions of a raven? Do you have any, any depictions of so and so?
Is it for tattoos? Because I imagine you get a lot of messages about tattoos.
Yeah, a few here and there. Yeah, but that's fine. Yeah, bring them on. But I don't do any. So yeah, sorry.
I would say the stags is something I guess you never really hear much about. I mean, Days, you know better than me, but it's not something that springs to mind when you think of kind of Norse mythology. You get your bears, your wolves, dragons, but stags doesn't seem very prominent. Ravens, stags feels like it's one that's kind of missed out or left out. And I imagine they would have been about. You would have, especially like in England, you would have plenty of deer.
I mean, do you hear a lot about cows or boars? Because they're present too, right? I think this might be what we as modern people are a little more fascinated with. It's a little cooler to be down with a bear or something like that than with a stag.
I like stags.
Yeah, me too.
So do they pop up? Is it quite common that they pop up in the sagas, stories, myths, that kind of thing? Or are they just kind of like a mediocre animal that pops up every now and then?
I mean, they pop up here and there. At the same frequency as wolves, no. But in significant contexts, yes.
It's not uncommon.
No, I mean, so if you think about the zoology of the world tree as it's described in Norse mythology, I think it's very significant that we're seeing snakes at the bottom, stags in the middle, and birds of prey in the top, right? We're told about these different animals in the book Grimsmal, for instance, there's the midhug, this worm or snake or whatever you want to translate that to, or and other snakes down there and around the roots. And then you have the branches. You have these 4 stags. One of them is called Eikthyrnir, and a couple of others. Can't remember what their names are. And then you have the eagle that sits at the top, and he sends messages down to Midler, the dragon, or snake in the bottom, right? By use of this squirrel, Dr. Toskov. And then you also have the falcon sitting between this.
I love the idea of the little squirrel just gossip.
Yeah, but so there's a couple of things that we can say about this. It tells us that there are certain animals associated with certain planes, so to speak, in our reality. Snakes are associated with the low ground. The stag seems to then be associated very firmly with the plane of reach as long as humans as well. And then you have the eagle and the falcon up top that are associated with the sky. And this association of the eagle or the falcon with the sky is so prevalent in Nordic mythology and in saga literature as well, that they show up all the time. The best examples are, of course, when Loki has to go to the Jotunheimar to screw something up or to fix what he screwed up. He turns into a falcon and flies over there, right? Odin, when he needs to escape Knutbjörg, and after he has drank all the mead, he turns into an eagle and flies off, and then he's followed by another eagle. This is a very common motif. It also shows up in sagas. Sometimes you have the premonition that 2 warriors are going to fight, and then that shows up as an eagle fighting another bird of prey, or 2 eagles fighting, or something like that. So yeah, this is very prevalent, and this tells us that in the mythology, it looks like these Scandinavians associated these different animals with different realms. Wolves, on the other hand, they're continuously always associated with outside, the outer perimeter of our existence, where everything's unsafe. So that's another thing that is important. Cows, cattle, associated with the infields. So it's a 3-dimensional image here, where you have on the vertical axis, you have the snakes below, the stags in the middle, and the birds of prey in the top. And when it comes to the horizontal space, you have the cattle and other kinds of pastoral animals, like the goat paver, who provides meat for feasting warriors in Valhalla. She's at the center too. And then outside, somewhere in what is called Utangats, in at least the Icelandic law codes, that's where you have wolves, the scary beasts. So it kind of looks like the Vikings, they weren't particularly thrilled about wolves, even though everybody nowadays is like, oh, wolves.
Well, yeah, that's because wolves aren't around and they're not outside your house. I'm
yeah,
about wolves.
They're not eating your pastoral animals.
Yeah, if there was the very much a risk of a pack of wolves eating me or my family, I would think fuck the wolves.
That's probably what most Vikings thought.
So Matthias, one thing I want to quickly ask and then link it back to Jonas is, so dragons in Norse mythology, they always tend to come across as quite snake-like, and in the artwork they always come across as snakes. I never really see dragons with wings in any artwork, and obviously when Sigurd kills the dragon, he kills it by it slithering across his sword. So how do we ever get kind of like flying dragons? Because obviously to us now, dragons are these big fire-breathing you know, beasts of the sky. The you know, it's very clear what a dragon is now, you know, in modern day. So I want to kind of ask you to clear that, but then also think about Jonas in how that comes across and why it's the way it is in the artwork.
So it's pretty simple with the so-called dragons. Most of them are snakes or worms. That's the word that's used. Ormur.
It's not as cool though, is it? Being killed by a worm.
Right, we get this earthworm kind of like idea.
All I can think of is Earthworm Jim now.
Yeah, okay. Got you. That's
No, so the thing is that there are flying dragons that show up here and there. For instance, at the end of the poem Girdlespout, which is really interesting, we have Nilhöggr, who seems to be flying out there in the distance. And this is, of course, a very old poem. This is presumably the oldest and possibly even a pre-Christian Eddic poem. So it's from the late 900s, early 1000s. But that's where scholarship tends to locate this poem in time, which means that it could very well have been composed by a pagan, right? It has a flying dragon in it. And that tells us that the idea of flying dragons has been present in Scandinavia, you know, from the Viking Age and onwards. Now, most of those so-called dragons that we encounter in the mythology, or even in sagas, like the Western saga, they are called worms. And to get the dragon, we seem to be using the Greek, Latin loanword draga. So there's a distinction in the Scandinavian mind at this period between the flying dragon and the not flying dragon. I don't think dragons tend to fly that much, actually, to people in that early medieval period. It comes later, but it becomes a significant image. And it's not an image that is completely non-existent either. But I think in most cases, you know, if you ask of a Viking to describe some kind of dragon-like thing, they would be describing a earth-dwelling, slithering, snake-like figure instead, which they also used, you know, for like to symbolize ships, right? Olaf Tryggvason, the Norwegian king who was responsible for bringing Christianity to Norway, is said to have had this giant ship called the Long Worm, or Nangli. So yeah, that was the main way that they would conceptualize these so-called dragons, if you ask me.
Yeah, so John, just tell like how that comes across in the artwork, and they say you never. I don't know of any piece of art where I've seen a dragon with wings.
No, I'm also thinking I don't recall seeing any dragons or animals other than birds with wings before the late Viking Age, on the verge to from Unasar to the Romanesque art. So I think that's the only depictions I can recall where we actually see wings. But it's curious that it's the wings suddenly appear on the same animals that we would define as snakes or dragons or worms or whatever we want to call them. And another thing in regards to the depiction of the animals is that they were maybe not that they were in some kind of flux or fluent in the way that they, especially in the Unastar, where we see the animals sometimes with 2 legs, 2 front legs, and no hind legs. Sometimes they have no legs at all. Sometimes they have what appears to be 4 legs, and so on. And in the late period, we see wings on them as well, sometimes. And they're very clearly the Christian, I would say, the Christian dragon at that time. It's to me at least, it seems obvious that's the. I would say that was the source of inspiration for that kind of depiction of a dragon, would be a Christian one.
I think you're right about that. And I think it's also important to consider that we need to distinguish between sort of like a homegrown, if you can call it that, Scandinavian dragon/snake motif, and then that more universal Christian motif that obviously refers back to the devil.
But I think it's curious when it comes to the Viking Age art and the art before that, and I'm not a historian, so I don't know the full picture, but it seems that the Nordic art is developed in kind of in a constant dialogue with continental European art and British as well, but it's in a constant dialogue and drawing inspiration from European and Christian references as well as Roman references to begin with, of course, but I think there's always this interplay between Christian iconography and Nordic iconography, and it's very difficult to distinguish I think you always end up in some kind of weird middle place or model in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the tradition of Nordic art is, at least as it develops from around the year zero, is more or less copying and redesigning motifs that comes from the south. We can look at Bratty, it's a great example of this, but we can also look at the artwork on weapons, where you can compare a Roman sword that has a nice naturalistic depiction of the war god Mars on it, for instance, and then you have the Germanic copy, which is basically like a stick figure. So there's a.
It looks like I did it. Something that I could do.
Yep, yeah, it does, and it's curious to see that especially when it comes to the Bracciates, that the Nordic versions very clearly depict some kind of emperor figure, but in a Nordic context, and then imposing some Nordic symbolism like birds and wolves or stags and whatever you can throw at it, and I think there's these three-figure Bracciates that is interpreted as being the death of Balder, which is very clearly a derivative motive taken from a Roman coin to depicting something entirely different. It has nothing to do with anything remotely reminiscent of the death of Balder. And
yeah. But see, this is the interesting thing.
Bloody fucks!
The question: are we dealing with some really shitty artists here, or are we dealing with something else happening? I'm more inclined to think that it's something else than just like really poor artists. I think that what's happening is that we're seeing an individual identity. That they're copying formats, but they're intentionally recreating the imagery on these Bracciates, for instance, based off of how their minds work with visual material. That's how I would interpret it.
For people who aren't the smartest like me, what are we talking about? First of all, what are we talking about?
Sorry.
And secondly, I guess they were talking about like the Nordic taking influence from Rome and doing their own interpretations of it, I assume. That's kind of what I got. So I just thought maybe we could pull it back and make it a little bit clearer, so I don't look quite so...
Sorry, I started nerding out here.
No, it's all right. It's good to hear, but I think obviously for other people, mainly me, just to be able to understand and then look up the pieces of art, and then they can put the actual thing to what we're talking about, or what you're talking about.
The Bracciates are these golden medallions, typically, that we find from like the 400s and into, I think the latest might be around the 600s. Can't really remember, but actually in a relatively short period of time. They look like they are copies of medallions that the Roman legions would wear on their armor. So what it basically seems like is that we have Germanic peoples copying a military art style that has a specific context in the Roman regions, and then using them for their own purpose.
Okay. So how long after the fall of Rome would that be?
But this is not so much after as in
at the same time,
and when it is happening. So this also that has some implications, right? Because the peoples who are involved with the fall of Rome are these Germanic tribes, and what we're seeing from the year zero and these first centuries after year zero is Germanic mercenaries, right? People coming from the northern German area and the Scandinavian area go into Rome, enlisting in their legions and fighting for them, and then if they survive, they go back. And they bring cultural artifacts and riches and a lot of interesting things with them. And this is probably like the origin of like narratives like Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. This is the idea of the hero who leaves home, goes out into the world, travels around, and comes back with power after he slays the dragon and so on.
I woke up at 9 o'clock today.
This is part of the development of the art style. We have evidence of
and I can say that I'm still not hungry even though it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
From
Don't know
the
why.
first century.
Very strange.
And Rome is incredibly influential on I would assume pretty much all aspects of life here. Everything from mythology to artwork to when it comes to architecture as well. And this doesn't really disappear. It doesn't go away even with the fall of Rome, so to speak. Also, consider that the fall of Rome isn't actually really a fall in that sense. And it's not actually that, I think when we talk about the fall of Rome, we're like seeing these images of these nice little Roman burning cities all over the place. That's not really what's happening. We have a split up in different ways, and in some places it's more peaceful than others, and so on. And that influence continues, right? So in the late 700s and early 800s, when Charlemagne has built his nice little Western sort of the incipient Holy Roman Empire in France and Germany, his culture is incredibly influential on Scandinavia too. Even if it's Christian, even if there's ambiguity, because there's obviously a religious problem here. I mean, it's very obvious to the Danes, especially if they're Danes at this point. We don't really know, but we may assume perhaps that there's a Danish kingdom just north of Saxony. That once Charlemagne invades Saxony in 771, and later in the 80s decides to decapitate 4,000 of them for being too heathen for him and all that stuff. This is making the Danes nervous, right? Politically, religiously, they're not particularly happy about that. But that doesn't, prevent the arts and a lot of ideological aspects too from like seeping into the north. And that's really the basis of Scandinavian art as well, because from the very early period, when these Germanic tribes were traveling around in Europe, several of them we know for a fact at this point. This has been disputed in random scholarly debates over the years, whether or not, for instance, the Goths come from Sweden and all that stuff. I think we can pretty much safely say they do at this point. There's no reason to really be discussing that. And the question is how they do and a lot of other things, but yeah, they probably have their origin up here somewhere, up there. Sorry, I'm in the US. I forgot that I'm Scandinavian for a while. and that connection to these homelands, or whatever you want to call them, is still present, at least in the form of alliances with rulers and chieftains or whatever they are up in Scandinavia. And we can detect those connections, those alliances, in the proliferation of art actually across Europe. So this is also, I think, an important part of the development of these styles, because it signals of relationships, right? So, for instance, you have the Sutton Hoo grave in England that has some artwork that is like almost identical to what you find in Wendel in Sweden, right? And this is just freaking amazing because this tells you that there's a hot link right there. They know each other. They are familiar with one another. In the same way, you can identify this elsewhere.
And I think that's a really important point to make, because we always talk about the beginning of the Viking Age at the sacking of Lindisfarne. And we know that the connections were imminent long before this point. So it's in some ways it makes sense to talk about some kind of a beginning point at this point, but in many other ways it simply does not make sense to begin some kind of era here. And especially when it comes to the artwork of these eras, there's a very clear through line from 450 or 400 to the 1100s. And this dialogue between European areas outside of Scandinavia is absolutely clear in the artwork made in Scandinavia. Yeah, so I think that was beautiful put by Matthias. That's exactly what I wanted to shed a light on in this conversation, because I think we miss that often when we talk about this, the Viking Age, or all the beautiful examples and the popular examples from the Viking Age that we put forward, and I really like to shed a light on this topic, because it's so much more intricate, and the connections are so much more intricate than just the year 1000. Then we became Christian in Scandinavia, and from that then on the artworks were Christian, and everything before that was heathen, and that's not the case. Already from 400 or even before, we had a very strong influence on Scandinavian art. And that's not to say that the artwork created in Scandinavian wasn't inherently Scandinavian or Norse or Nordic or whatever you want to call it, but it's in this constant dialogue and inspiration, discussion back and forth between the connections throughout Europe and beyond.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, if we really do want to set sort of like a beginning around 793 when Lindisfarne is attacked, I think what we can say is what it begins, so to speak. What begins at that point is perhaps more Scandinavian magnate involvement in areas outside of Europe in terms of military and conquest. We don't see a lot of that before, a couple of indications here and there. But for instance, in the 500s, 600s, 700s, before the attack, we're not seeing a lot of Scandinavian attempts at pushing the borders south, so to speak. But that's what happens in the 800s. That's
and tell me if I'm wrong, but that's in many ways also a response to what's going on in Europe. That, as you mentioned before, that the European powers are forcing their way north, so to speak. So in many ways, that could maybe be seen as a pushback.
I think that would be the case for that kingdom that exists in the Danish area, or those kingdoms. There might be more than one at this time. I'm not sure if the kingdom in Vestland and in Norway is necessarily focused on the same thing, or they have other agendas. I think it's fairly reasonable to suggest that the Lindisfarne attack is peoples from Norway. but we can't be certain about that. It could be people from the Danish area. Obviously, what anybody needs to understand at this point is that those nation states that we know today, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, they didn't exist back then. It was very different constructions and different identities. But that aside, it's probably people from the Norwegian area who are attacking Lindisfarne and definitely Iona and elsewhere in the Irish area and so on. This has also been confirmed by genetics, as we talked with Sturla about in the previous episode. Norwegians did go in that direction. That was primarily Norwegians, not only, but primarily. And in the same way, it was primarily Danes that went straight to the Danelaw. Not exclusively, but primarily. And this tells us a little bit about interest.
Small
Right? The Danish kingdom, or kingdoms, from the 800s, from the beginning of the 800s onward, does seem to have a huge military interest in the English area.
Possibly go wrong.
And
I'll take you, little one.
This is incredibly interesting because it means then that there is a centralized force there that has aspirations to become a empire itself, I guess. And yeah, as you say, this is a response. So I've always been a little, I think it's a little conspiracy theory-ish to think of this in terms of like a pushback against Christianity. But in some ways, it is also a likely thing that's happening because, as I said, Charlemagne literally invades Saxony because, well, he wants to conquer Saxony. He's about conquering. He does this to Thuringia, to Lombardy, and a bunch of other places in that eastern central area of Europe, was now Germany and Austria and Italy, of course. And he says when he conquers Saxony, well, this is because they're pagans, right? And that sends a signal to all the other non-Christian kingdoms out there, whether they are Slavic kingdoms in the Polish area or they are the Scandinavian kingdoms in Scandinavia, right? But they're like, well, maybe we should respond to that. And the Danish kingdom does respond to that, at least according to the source material that we have available. The King, the Saxon chieftain or king, whatever we want to call him. I mean, he enlists mercenaries from Denmark, and receives help from north. Right, so that seems to suggest that there is a geopolitical interest in southern Scandinavia, at least, to push back against this attempt to push the border of this Frankish Empire north. And this continues. Harald Bluetooth, his conversion to Christianity and all that stuff also seems to be a response to this, probably because he got his ass kicked by the German emperor at the time. There are two versions of that story, and one is the preferred Danish version, which is like, Harald Bluetooth was convinced by the German bishop Otto that he should convert to Christianity because Otto would do magic tricks. And then there's the one that the people from further north, the Norwegians and the Swedes and the Icelanders in particular, which is the one that tells us that Harald Bluetooth got his ass kicked. This is also because Harald Bluetooth at the time has political interest in Norway. And mind you, the Danish kings at the time are harassing the Norwegian kings in Vestlandet. The southern parts of Norway tend to be under some kind of Danish control at the time, until Harald Hardruler actually in the early 1000s. So this is a geopolitical problem to the Norwegians that are trying to establish a North Sea Empire or an Atlantic Empire, which they succeed in doing in the 1100s, especially with Magnus the Good, who ends up becoming king of Denmark as well for a period, and a lot of things happen here. But what this ultimately points at is that the 800s is the beginning of a time where the Scandinavian elite is almost, it's all of a sudden very focused on establishing itself as an elite elsewhere in Europe. And this happens in Normandy, and it happens in England as well. And as I said before, the Norman conquest of England should actually be seen, in my opinion, as an extension of that. Because it does look like the Scandinavians get a leg up from the Normans. And we have at least a minimal amount of place names that are produced from Scandinavian compounds and Norman names after Norman conquest. And that's really interesting. Not a lot of people have looked into this. But it suggests an alliance here of sorts. So yeah, that's what's really happening with the Viking Age. But when we look at the art and when we look at trade, what we're seeing is a period that begins way before the Viking Age of interaction between Scandinavians and these both Germanic kingdoms and also not necessarily Germanic kingdoms in what is the Roman area, basically.
So, Jonas, to take it back to art, where did the Vikings kind of Viking Age styles come from? I guess because I know you've been looking to art styles pre-Viking Age, but I don't see anything that's similar to like the Viking styles other than like the Celtic stuff. I guess I don't really see stuff that's very similar, maybe like really crazy knotwork. So where did it kind of come from?
Yeah, and I have a limited knowledge about that because I've been very narrowly focused on Viking Age and Nordic art. So I actually lack that knowledge, and it really bugs me sometimes because, but there's, as we already talked about, it points back to the idea that they were, of course, inspired by for example, the bracteates were inspired by Roman art, and directly took these motifs and put their own spin on it. So then you could ask, then where did they get this quote-unquote spin or this style they added to it? And that's a good question, I'd say. Maybe it comes back to tradition, and that's where I may have a lack of knowledge, because I don't know about the connections to the Celtic areas and how long outside they were connected, and how the art looked at, say, the 400s. I know there was absolutely a connection up until the beginning of the Viking Age, but how and when and why, and I actually don't know.
There's a couple of things. Again, I'm not an expert on the art, but a couple of things that I know is that some of the gripping animals that we've seen in the Viking Age, and a little before, they look like they are inspired by the Frankish area, the art in the Frankish area, and then the monumentalism, the rune stones and such, and some of the art on them, it does seem like it is inspired from at least the sort of the relationship to the British Isles. We also see, in northern England, where you're at, we do see a distinctly Nordic art appearing, right? We have the hogback stones.
But that's late, or then we're in the Viking Age. But I'm thinking, if we take it, do you know anything about, say, the 400s or the 500s and the Sutton Hoo burial, for instance? We know there was a connection. I'm just not sure how did the artworks look on the British Isles.
So to answer this question about the connections between Sutton Hoo and the Vendel area, I think the art style, that the Old English art style that we're seeing there, is inspired by the Frankish and Merovingian art. That's how I understand it, at least, but I'm not at all sure. It could be something else, though.
You're talking about the Scandinavian style,
Yeah, so I'm talking about the developments of the style that very much mirrors what we also see in the Sutton Hoo. I think that's inspired by Merovingian art, but I'm not sure at all, actually.
Yeah, that I would say the same, but I heard that, read that somewhere, but I don't know, so I can't speak to that, but I would tend to agree.
And there's also a Byzantine influence on the art from the 500s and onwards, I think. Yeah.
But I think the interesting thing is, to Daniel's point, that we can talk about all these sources of inspiration, but every time they are taken back to Scandinavia, there seems to be put the spin on them. It's not directly copied. It's never directly copied in that sense. Even up in the late Viking Age, where we have this very close connection with European Christian nobility, and we see this very tight connection with gift givings, and we find all these artifacts all around Europe coming from Scandinavia. They always have this very Scandinavian style, and I don't know, but it seems to me that it is in some way a kind of Scandinavian DNA, or what you want to call it. And one of the things why I tend to see it that way is because many of these motives or these ways of treating the animals, like the serpents and the interlacing patterns and what have you, are so inherently Scandinavian, and they begin somewhere around the 400s and then go all the way up to the inside there, where we have this more broader integration with the rest of Europe, also identity-wise. So in this period we have it seems to me, at least when I'm looking at the artwork and when I'm analyzing these ways of constructing artwork, that we have a very inherent Scandinavian method of approaching depiction of any kinds of motifs. And of course it develops throughout the ages, but there is some kind of essence, Scandinavian essence to it, that deals around the interlacing patterns and the stag motive, or what you want to call it, and the serpents and birds of prey and these themes and characteristics.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. I was wondering whether it was a case of this was an art style that they just created and it kind of came from Scandinavia. I was born there, or whether it was a case of them, looking at other pieces of artwork and then just adapting it slightly, adding to it, and then another style born from that.
So there's a couple of things that we can identify also from the tapestries from Oseberg, for instance. It's really interesting. I've thought of a couple of times. It's really interesting that these what looks like trees, where we might even have like hanged human sacrifices in them in depiction, they're interlaced. And that just seems like it's very deliberate. And I mean, if anything, maybe what we're dealing with the clothing in particular is that's where we would probably find, like in the textile is where we probably would find sort of perhaps a much older artistic expression in different ways. I mean, I think you're totally right when you say that there is the very distinct Scandinavian identity in the artwork that they might borrow stuff, they might get inspiration from the outside, but then they take it in their own direction, and there's a spiritual dimension to this that exists both pre and post conversion. I would suggest at least, and especially with the interlacing of threads and snakes and whatever it is basically, and that is we see this in mythology too. We see in the use of words, symbols, and motifs in mythology a tendency to claim that the world is interlaced in different ways. We see it in the context of fates, where we have the idea of spinning, weaving, right? That shows up. But aside from that, we also have words that are attached to the Nordic gods that mean those who tie or the bonds, presumably of the world. We have it in the world serpent as well. That seems to be holding the entire world together, right? And we have it in Loki being tied in the underworld so as to prevent Ragnar. This is really interesting. He's tied in the underworld to prevent Ragnar. So there's multiple ideas present in this old cultural material that we have available to us, written down in the medieval period, suggesting interlaced relationships across the board in the Scandinavian worldview, basically. And this is also present on the Yellowstone. If the image of Christ is any indicator, right? He's interlaced. He's not hanging across. He's interlaced in what looks to be plant material or something like that.
And the same thing with the stag, with every motive. And there's so many layers to it. And I think it's of course some of the aspects that make hiking art so appealing. It's also another point is that it's extremely enigmatic the way it's executed, and these weaving patterns are laid out. And even in some of the more very Christian, like the Bamberg shrine and that stuff, they have these ways of making. Then in modern days we would make it very clear what the message is, but in this culture it seems to be a very distinct point to not reveal what the message is. And we see it throughout, and the weaving of things speak to that too in some ways. And I think you can tie it into the way Kenning's work and in the language, and there's all sorts of ways of wrapping things up in themselves in so many ways. And we could do it another episode just going through all these aspects, but yeah, it's fascinating.
No, but you're totally right though. Kennings are a great example of how you're basically entangling language and words too. And I was just instantly reminded of those parts of Howlmal that talk about runes, where Odin says that you must find runes. Where are you finding these runes? Well, that's a good question. If runes represent meaning, right, then this could be in that interlaced style just as much as anywhere else. We know from the secret Howlmal that you can find runes on the nails of the Norns and in all kinds of funky places on the prow of a ship. So there's definitely something to that. That's you're totally right. There's always layered meaning in all this, and it's almost as if the artist is commanding you to look for some kind of expression here that's not necessarily expressed at all.
Yeah, and just to make a point of it, to go back to the early eras of the art, or the early styles, we see, it's in the 400s too, where we see these single animals mirrored, making out a third animal, if you understand what I'm describing, that the two animals come together and constitute a third animal face or something. So you may perceive it as an animal head at first, as a single animal head, but a closer look, you discover that there's actually two animals, and then there's three, and when you take a look at the bodies, then they are all kinds of animals intertwined in them. So you can never be sure of what you're seeing, and combine that with these very clear organic depictions, portraits intermingled with the art. You have this very rhythmic, enigmatic thing hinting at the characteristics of a Odin figure or a Loki figure. This magic being convoluted and not revealing all to you, but having infinite layers of wisdom intrinsic in him if you just kind of know how to decipher this language or pick up the room, so to speak.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's true.
I'm more confused about Viking art than ever.
So I wanted to throw one last thing in there about all of this, and this has to do with the aesthetics of modern Scandinavian art and also architecture. I forgot his name, but there's a prominent architect who's written about Scandinavia and using the interplay between light and shadow. His book is called Nightlands. If anybody who's interested, I can't remember his name for the life of me. But he argues that the Scandinavian that doesn't matter whether or not it doesn't matter if you're in Denmark or Norway and Sweden or in the far north. What we always have is sort of like a prominence of shadow in the Scandinavian landscape. We have the Norwegian fjords and forests, for instance, a good example of how there's constantly something breaking the light and introducing shadow and introducing some kind of something that is obscuring the vision. This also happens in the Danish landscape, even though it is much flatter, but we have this thicket that is present. I'm not going to sort of sit here and claim that this was the thing that people were also considering when they were making art back in the Viking Age, but it is interesting to see that there is that constant play between being able to see clearly and then having your vision obscured by the thicket that shows up in the woods, in the brushes, in the bushes, and all that stuff, in all kinds of contexts all the time in the Scandinavian landscape. I don't know if that resonates with you, Jonas, but
absolutely.
But
and I think we could again take another episode just about that, because I think what it reminds me of is a thing that also speaks to me about the Viking Age art and Viking Age mythology and all that, is that in contrast to maybe the more Christian myth and religion, there's this notion that dark and light is part of it's part of life. It's integral. It's not. Yeah, you can say it's opposing forces, but there's also this notion of dark and light coming together to create new things, to create life, if you will. And on its face, you can talk about that in regards to the Asia and the Jotun and how their interplay is playing out. So just to give a short answer that I think there's definitely something to it, that this theme is also playing out in architecture and in throughout the Scandinavian identity, so to speak, and how let's be honest, we're living this every day in the way that we have the seasons. And we're living very close with the seasons, so we have it's just a part of our experience to live with the shadow and to live with the what's it called, the space in between the shadow and the light. And of course you can go on about all kinds of discussions about how that plays out and how that could be interpreted and how that could be seen in architecture and art and in the mythology and all that. But I think that's very clear to me that that's integral to the Scandinavian experience, so to speak.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, let's wrap this one up. Like I said, we can always do this again and speak about all the other things we could touch on.
We can just nerd out about the building styles, the Charlotte's houses and all that stuff. We'll have to do that.
We will, I mean, thank you very much for coming on. If you just want to let people know where they can find your book. As I said, the book is excellent. It's certainly a good starting point for people to really try and get their heads around these different styles and get some basic understanding.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's easy. You just go to my website, jonaslarmarkussen.com, and you can read it online, or you can subscribe to my newsletter and get a PDF version of it if you like to. So that's straightforward. And as mentioned before, there's a prequel to the book coming. I don't know when, because it's a piece to work with, but it's coming. It's in the works, and you can kind of, if you look at the chapters on my website about Viking Age art, there's a link to the coming chapters there as well, and it's, as I said, a work in process, so just go have a look.
Yeah, absolutely. Is your Instagram just your name as well?
Yeah, it is.
So you put pieces up there that you're working on?
Yeah, I think that's the main channel too. Yeah, the website is of course my base, and then I have Instagram as a secondary, and of course my YouTube channel, where I post some tutorials and what have you. I think if you search for my name on YouTube, it'll pop up. but otherwise, in the bottom of my website, you'll find a link to it. And I think I've also posted a couple of videos on the front page of the website. So just go there and you'll find it.
And you'll find everything from there.
Yeah.
Matthias, where can people find you?
You can always find me on Instagram under my name. You can find the Nordic Mythology channel on Facebook, where I occasionally post links to.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by my company, Hornswarden. We've recently released a brand new gift set. The gift set contains a 25cl bottle of mead, and you have the choice from 3 flavours, including our brand new spiced mead. As well as that, you get a small rustic drinking horn, and both are displayed in a nice little gift box. So head over to the website, hornswarden.com, to grab yourself one. Also, keep an eye out, as we're going to be adding more items and gift sets over the next month. On top of that, we give listeners of the podcast a bonus 10% off with a discount code HORNS10. So remember to use the code HORNS10 at checkout. Right, let's jump into the show. Hello, welcome to the Nordic Mythology Podcast. I'm Daniel Farron, co-owner of Hornswarden, and I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Matthias Nordvig.
Hello, everyone. This time we are joined by Vicky Mikaelsen from Norway. Vicky is a historian and a World Heritage Coordinator for the municipality of Nordodden in Norway, and you're also one of the primary people behind the festival Midgårdsblot that takes place at the historical site Bora in southeastern-ish Norway, close to Horten, south of Oslo. So welcome, Vicky. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be here.
How are you? Let's start with some formalities.
Oh, I'm good. It's the weekend, so it's some time to relax. But yeah, this whole situation going on in the world right now is pretty strange, both for the festival and what I do as my day job. So it's strange times, and it's strange not having Midgårdsblot this year. But we're hoping things will change for next year so that everybody can get back up on their feet.
I mean, how does it affect your day job? I know you said you work for the World Heritage. I guess with a lot of sites have been closed down, it can be easy.
Yeah, it's been difficult. Maybe not. My job is probably not the one that's been affected the most, but I can feel it with it. You know, all the meetings are online. Lots of travels are cancelled. Things are not just working as they used to. So things takes a lot more time. But you know, for museums and sites, at first everything was closed down, and then during summer everybody started traveling within Norway. So there were actually visitor records at the local museums because people were actually traveling in Norway. So that was nice. So that was rather unexpected, but very welcome.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's one thing that most countries will be having is tourism within itself. I know in the UK, obviously, a lot of people have just been going on holiday within the UK, which must be, will be good for local businesses, local hotel, B&Bs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's for a lot of people. I think local history can be a lot more exotic than you think, because you don't really. Sometimes you know the history of Egypt more than you know your own local history, and I think this is a brilliant chance to actually know what's going on in your town. And like I'm working with World Heritage because Nordodden got on the UNESCO's World Heritage list in 2015 for their industrial history. And a lot of people, they just walk by all beautiful factories and places here and know nothing about them. And when they start hearing the stories behind, they're quite impressed, and all of a sudden they look upon their own town very differently. And I think that's what's happening with Midgårdsblot as well, and Horten and Bora, and you know, people knowing the local history, and which is the Viking history, and then seeing, you know, people pouring in from all over the world who's really excited to learn about Horten and Bora. So
Yeah.
it can be very exciting and exotic just around the corner.
Yeah, and this is one of the interesting things. I think a lot of Scandinavians, and probably, you know, especially those of us who are either in sort of like the field or have a personal interest, we are, you know, very familiar with Bora and the Midgård Center, the little museum there, right? But what I've heard is that after you guys put on the festival, all of a sudden it's getting a lot of international attention as well, which is well deserved too. I mean, it's a great little place.
Yeah. We really changed that because they had a hard time getting international visitors coming over, and we kind of loosened that up. So the museum, they experienced lots of new people coming over there that hasn't been there before. And I can see it here in Telemark where I live. It's 1 hour and a half drive to Horten from Nordodden where I live, and we have Norway's biggest stave church in Nordodden. And I see a lot of black-clad people, more than before. Some of the people working at the stave church are a bit worried.
Well, as long as you don't come with torches, it's probably going to be fine, right?
And I try to calm them down, like, no, this is good.
It's a good development.
It is, and I think, you know, the Viking Age and the stories about the Viking Age, they pop up in the most unexpected places, like this example here. But the Viking Age has been used so many times for branding, and it has, you know, in times of crisis, you kind of look back and then you pick up something old and make something new, you know, for the future. So I think what we see is this immense interest in the Viking Age. I mean, the world is in a crisis right now with climate and lots of things going on. but we can learn something from the past. So we look to the past and we pick something there that feels meaningful and we use it in real time and then create a path to the future. And I think that has happened so many times before, and not always with a good result. I mean, the Nazis did that too during Second World War, and I think that's one of the reasons why Viking history has been so difficult in Norway since the Second World War, because they kind of took the Viking Age and it has been untouchable since. And I think that has been at the back of many people's head when we started with Midgårdsbro, because at Orre, the Norwegian Nazi organizations had their biggest meetings where we actually have the festival. So it was a bit, okay, what's going on right now? But everything is calm now. They know where we stand and that we're not going in that direction. But I think this summer they've had a very interesting exhibition at the Midgård Viking Center telling that story about the Norwegian Nazis and also taking place at Orre. And it's
Norway also has sort of like a, compared to, well, and maybe this is a stretch, I don't know, like, of course, the black metal incidents that we saw earlier with the burning state churches and murders, and also mixing in Nazi ideology back in the 90s. I mean, that is also a little present, I guess, for a lot of people. So seeing a bunch of black-clad people and the heavy metal and the Viking stuff.
Yeah, what's going on?
I mean, but obviously that is not what's going on.
No, and that's a good thing, that people are really pleased. We have so much support from the local community and from the local politicians and the regional politicians, and a lot of universities are really impressed with what's going on and find it really interesting. So at the moment there's 2 really big research projects going on where Midgårdsbro is one of the cases, because they see that there's something new going on, and also how we involve a lot of different people in creating the festival, that we are not just putting on bands and selling beer, but we are making a lot of cultural activities too, as with the seminars that I'm running, and arts and crafts and games and whatever. We try to. It's like when you think that if you have an interest in history, you just sit down and read books. But an interest in history can take on so many forms, and that's what we see at Midgårdsbro. Some use the interest in music or spirituality or tattoos or art or comics or whatever. But everybody has in common that they have like this interest in the past, and I think that's really exciting. But because I think the flat or the usual way of telling history can be a bit flat and one-dimensional. It lacks texture, so to speak. And I think if we co-tell or co-create history, you can access interpretations that you would never have thought of if you haven't come at it from a different direction. It's like when Einar Selvik from Vardruna talks about music and how, because he knows the instrument so well and so intimately, he can actually say something about music and the past that wouldn't have been possible if you were only an academic, reading the books. So the crafts coming from elsewhere, the professional crafts that people are doing in so many ways, they can add something to the storytelling of the past, and I think that's really interesting and important.
Yeah, it's living it and experiencing it. I think you learn something on another dimension from reading it from a book. And I think it's important to do that as well, because if you have something in your hands and you do it, you may unlock something that you necessarily wouldn't see just in text. Having it there and playing around with it. I think Mateus, you said before about the shields and maybe that they weren't used defensively but more offensively, and that's something that you wouldn't really know without picking one up, holding it, feeling it,
and trying it out.
Exactly, and trying it, and then you learn something. Like you say with Einar, with the music, him playing it and learning it and living it, then suddenly you get a different perspective on it.
See, no, I agree completely, and we can sort of relate this to the very simple realization. Like, if you say you're really interested in Norwegian history and you've read a bunch of books about Norway, but you're not from Norway, you might be from England somewhere, and then you take a trip to Norway, and then you travel around, and then you see the sites that were mentioned in the history book you were reading, and then all of a sudden that adds some new context. I mean, it's that simple sometimes, right? And this is sadly something that a lot of people in our field as academics, they forget. There's a little too much armchairing around here. People are just sitting there reading the books and forgetting about.
No, but it is, and it's like but it's like acknowledging that the different strategies to learning about history have its own value, and I think that's important because I have a master's in Viking studies, and but it's interdisciplinary, so it's not just history, right? It's all the disciplines focusing on Viking and medieval history, and in the middle of doing that, I went to Cambridge and I stayed for half a year. And I did lots of study groups with students from Cambridge who are extremely clever and very, they are singling things out, they're going in depth, and they are really good at what they do. They know the Latin and Old Norse, and they are really good at so many things that I was not. But at the same time, when we were in study groups, I could ask completely different questions than they could. So and my professor, Rosamund McKittrick, she was very pleased with that because it was something that she didn't see. So even though I didn't have the in-depth maybe that the others had, I had the overview. And when we were brought together as a group, that really worked out, because then you could start discussing things a bit differently. And I think that's what's happening at Midgårdsbro, that we are co-creating or co-exploring history, and I think that has a value of its own.
No, I think you're totally right, and I think maybe one of the reasons that we agree so much on this is that I also come from a very interdisciplinary background with like history, archaeology, philology, and so on. And I think you're totally right. Sometimes it's also more what's needed than somebody just picking at a Old Norse word for 10 years. Sometimes we need to ask more broader questions and try to see how we can combine different knowledge fields. And yeah, no, that's exactly what happens in New Gospel. I mean, you can go through a little forest that has these wonderful sort of like scary installations, right? Heavy metal installations. Then you come to a Viking market. Then you can go to sit and listen to a professor talk at the seminary series that you have. And then you can go get some roasted pigs and get drunk. Shit in front of the stage, right? Exactly. I mean, that sounds like other to me.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah.
It sounds brilliant.
Yeah, it is. No, and also New Gospel is all about metal too. I remember I think it was last year after the seminars, I hurried up to one of our venues because I wanted to see the Icelandic death metal band Natral. And I came in there, I was like, oh, did I make it? And they were on stage, and I was like, yay! And then this young guy came up to me, do you like death metal? Yes. Now you're even cooler. I thought you were just into the academics. But I think that's what's special about Midwestern too, that it's not only a Viking history festival. We're not all serious. We like to just headbang and have a drink and have a good time. And for me, metal has been so important since I was like 12 years old. But the funny thing is that it kind of started with a bit of Viking metal because we have this Norwegian band, TNT. And one of their first albums was named Knights of New Thunder with a Viking helmet on front and all that. And somehow the Viking Age has been kind of seeping into my life here and there. And all of a sudden I was studying it. It was most unexpected. And then a lot of years later, Midgårdsblod came along with my friend Runa, Runa Strindin, who is the boss and the founder of Midgårdsblod. Yeah.
I mean, I can completely attest to what you just said because, probably 5 years ago, I was just a plumber, going out working 5 days a week, fitting bathrooms, fitting boilers, that kind of thing. And then somehow I ended up with a cow horn. I carved it and made a drinking horn. And, 5 years later, I've got a business making clothing. And,
that's awesome.
Selling mead and beer and everything. It's like, how the fuck did this happen? And then I've got a podcast with a doctor of Nordic studies, and I'm like, what? Wait, what happened in the last 5 years?
Oh, that's the beauty of it. I love that. I really love that.
I can't say it's the same for me though. I kind of planned it. I think it was definitely in high school. I was like, I want to study Viking shit at the university, and then it was just like to figure out the way and how and all that stuff. And then I took a detour somewhere else, and but ended up here anyway. So yeah,
I think I must have had an interest in it to some degree because we ended up at the Jorvik Viking Festival, which is where I actually bought the first. I bought a horn from we were looking around and I was like, I want a drinking horn. So I was that typical kind of guy who was there. I'm like, I want a drinking horn. And we were looking around and I found one, and we bought it. And then I got it home and I realised it was pretty much just a raw horn. It hadn't been cleaned inside or anything. So I was like, I'm gonna carve it. I'm gonna line it with beeswax and that kind of thing. And then I ended up, a friend saw it and he went once. I made one for him, and it snowballed from there into a business. But it's kind of like all the things that could have happened differently, and I just wouldn't have ended up here. If I had bought a horn from somebody else that was finished and ready to drink from, then I probably wouldn't have done anything with it. And it's just these weird turns. If I had turned left rather than right, I could just be
exactly. Yeah.
I could not be here. I could be still a little plumber somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely interesting the paths that we take, and I don't believe in fate or having like a path sort out, but I do think it's weird how this happened, and the way that it kind of grew from what was just an interest into pretty much becoming my whole life.
No, it's like everything is finally coming together, and it's like with me and Runa, we've known each other for 10, 12, 15 years. I've lost count, but she was always doing these synth festivals, and then she worked for Inferno for a bit, and I liked metal and I liked synth a bit, and we had a lot of the same preferences, and we went to this thing in Norway also called Gotham Nights, and we had so much things in common, and we never understood why we didn't know each other before, because we happened to know each other much later. And then we had kids and we lost contact for a bit, and then all of a sudden Runa said, oh, I'm starting up this new festival called Blod, to commemorate the 200 years of Norway's constitution. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So you're doing Viking stuff now? I was a bit surprised. Yeah, of course. And then she went up and did that. It was a huge success, and I was supposed to come. But then Laibach, which is one of my favorite bands around, they played the Olav Tryggvason opera as a Laibach thingy in Oslo that same weekend that Blod was. So I said to her, no, I can't come. I need to see Laibach do Olav Tryggvason. So it was Viking shit that made me not go. And then
that's pretty badass.
It is. It's so cool. It was really cool. Completely crazy. And but but then Eidsvåg was a success, but she couldn't continue there, so she was looking for a new location and ended up in Borre in Vestfold. And then the first year she said, you should come and do some work with me. And she knew I'd worked at museums and done lots of stuff, both Vikings and other stuff, and she asked me, can't you come and do something for children? So that was the first thing I did the first year. And then everything just expanded, and eventually I became one of the core members of the festival and runs the seminars. So I've kind of grown into the festival with Runa. For some reason, she didn't remember kind of that I had a master's in Vikings, but everything, all of a sudden, everything just fit. And it's so much fun how what we know and how our interests that we have in some together, they are kind of just Midgårdsblod. So it makes it very easy to plot out new things to do, and you know, we have a lot of fun doing this. And there's a lot of, we are a core of maybe 5-6 people working with the festival, but then we have a lot of volunteers and others with us throughout the year and also during the festival. That's really important. But it's like Midgårdsblod from the first year, we were maybe around 500 people. It was a disaster really economically, but we worked up ourselves up year by year, and at the end it was like 5,000 people. And for a small organization, growing fast is a challenge because you don't necessarily have the people you need to do what needs to be done for free. Because it's not like when you are building something from the bottom, you don't have the economic muscles to pay everyone immediately. So you know this.
Absolutely, I think so. And it can be detrimental to grow too quick as well. If you grow too fast, you can soon go bankrupt or for whatever reason. This is definitely,
you need to watch it.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we've struggled with Holland's Welding, like I said, because I came from a plumbing background. Sarah was a dog groomer, and we weren't business people. We didn't go to business school. We have no idea or had no idea how to run a business. So thankfully we were in a position where we grew organically and just reinvested the money back in that we made, and it grew over time slowly. It takes 5 years to get here, but we've had to learn everything about business. It's not easy. Marketing and advertising and how to keep your books. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Like you say, you need people there, but you can't always pay them. So you need to ask a lot of favors.
There's a lot of challenges to that. Lucky for us, Runa has an education in both business and all that.
Oh, that's always handy.
And a lot of people don't think she has it because she looks so metal. But she has some badass education there.
Never judge a
she
book
knows
by
what she's doing.
That's like when people on campus assume that I'm one of the students.
You're a prime example of that.
Yeah, no, you can be a professional at something and still look like you just rolled out of the gutter.
I mean, I know that we're half an hour into this now, and I feel like we've maybe just assumed that everybody listening knows what Midgårdsblod is. So I don't know if you want to maybe take. I mean, I guess most people have guessed by now, but I don't know if you just want to take a minute just to explain kind of what it is, maybe where it is, and a little bit about it, just to give people a bit of a background as well.
Yeah, Midgårdsblod is a metal festival in Vestfold in Norway. It's a 1.5 hour drive or train from Oslo, and it takes place mid-August every year. And we are around, as I said, around 5,000 a day inside the festival site. And what's interesting about the site is that it's an old burial ground. So it's the biggest assembly of burial mounds in Northern Europe, and they're from around 600 to 900, dated AD. And so the site is pretty impressive. It's by the sea, and our campsite is by the shore, so it's very popular to go out bathing and swimming. It's very beautiful there. And then the cool thing is that they have erected a reconstructed Viking hall.
Oh, wow.
Huge Viking hall, where we can put in around 250, 300 people for a gig. And then we have like smaller gigs there. And the music we have a lot of extreme metal, black metal, death metal especially. And then we have a lot of folk music. We have a lot of electronica, but it's the common theme is that it's the dark side of everything. So it's dark folk, it's dark electronica, and of course dark metal. And we have like a common string is that you have like you're interested in the dark mythologies, and that means it doesn't have to be only Norse mythology. I mean, a lot of metal bands are really into Egyptian, Persian stuff, So it's more about prehistoric mythologies that interest a lot of our audience and that we pick up somehow. But because we are at a Norse site, a very important Norse site in Norway, we focus mainly on the Norse histories. And then along with like a 3-day, next year it's going to be 4 days of gigs. We have we broadcast movies, we do cartoon workshops where we have the best cartoonists in the world to teach kids or grown-ups, with kids inside, to do comics, Norse comics. We have seminars, 4-day seminars where you can learn about Viking history, or we also have like a bit of British business things going on. Lots of Norse food, Norse drinks, and we make a lot of effort in making the surroundings welcoming. Our slogan is "Welcome Home." It awaits you as you enter the site, because we are at We call ourselves Midgard's Blut, and Midgard is the world of men in Norse mythology, and the Blut is to sacrifice or to strengthen the gods. So what happens is that when people arrive, we open the festival with a Blut, which is a sacrifice, where we have a big bowl of blood, and we have some Norse statues, and then we have the band Folket Bortafor Nordavind, the people beyond the northern wind in English, and they are leading the ceremony and kind of sacrifice to the different, east, west, north, and so on, and the gods. And the idea is to kind of have a starting point, gather and say, okay, we're here together. Now is when we are gathered here, it's going to be peace, to set a good tone. And then a lot of people go forth and splatter some blood on themselves, maybe make a personal sacrifice. For some people, it's just theater. For other people, it's something deeply personal and spiritual. And other people who is a bit further back in the crowd, they think this is completely crazy. So it's, but the main thing is that our opening ceremony is open for interpretation. So you're not pushed into anything. You can be a spectator and enjoy it, or you can take part in a personal way. And then when the whole festival is over, we arrange for Ragnarok, the end of the world, so that the circle is closed, and when a year comes, we're going to meet again. But then we go with torches to one of the grave mounds, and we stand around it, several thousand people with torches. And then Folket Bortafor Nordavind is drumming, and it's a really, really nice experience in the pitch of dark night when we stand there together.
Imagine after...
It's something people remember.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally, after 3 days of drinking, I feel like it's Ragnarok, so
yeah.
I imagine that's what it's it's like for a lot of people.
Yeah. So we say that when you are entering the festival grounds of Midgard, you're entering Norse time. It's something else. But of course, it is first and foremost we identify as a metal festival, but we explore both the stories, the historical stories, and the musical inspirations that has always inspired metal. And both folk and electronica is very important here. But we are all about metal. Some people say, oh, Midgard, no, that's not my cup of tea. I'm more into death metal. I like it. Well, then you should come because we have a lot of death metal and black metal and extreme metal. But we have other stuff too. And what's fun is that we have like one segment of the audience that is very metal and has the usual metal attire. And then we have the other segment, which is all about being Vikings. More or less authentic. Some are more playful, some are more authentic. And the Viking people doesn't always enjoy metal. And the metal people doesn't always enjoy folk stuff or Viking stuff. But what happens is that people get surprised, and they are surprised, but I like this. So we feel that we are challenging people's musical preferences, and we are doing it with success because people are actually exploring new types of music and maybe exploring themselves a bit too when coming to the festival.
Yeah, it sounds like a beautiful mix of people.
It is. It's very friendly, and that's something people say, and also people who are just visiting, maybe because they are politicians or businessmen or whatever, who's just curious to go and have a peek, is that, oh, this is so friendly, and they are really surprised. But I suppose that's also a trait of metal festivals. A lot of people say that, if you go to a metal gig, there's a really good atmosphere and really nice people.
People are usually well behaved.
Yeah, they are.
That's it. I think to anybody on the outside that doesn't necessarily listen to metal or has never been to a metal festival, it can come across quite intimidating. It's quite angry sounding music. So I think people may just assume that the crowd is also like that when that's not usually the case.
No, people are just generally happy, and I think, for me at least, it's like sometimes I say I would never been this happy if I hadn't listened to extreme metal because I get rid of all. It's not that, and I'm not angry when I'm listening to music. It's just. I suppose I'm allowed to acknowledge the darker sides and the aggressive sides in a very safe way by accessing them through the music somehow.
I think that's just something we've spoken about on the podcast before. I think everybody has to get rid of aggression somehow, whether it's through music, through sport. It's a good thing to do. I think the world would be a much calmer place if more people did.
Yeah, and there's plenty of research that backs this up that demonstrates that if you have some kind of venue to access that darker side, then that helps with your general mood and also your patience and tolerance. That's why I do it.
No, but there's a reason behind the yin and yang and all that. You should be a little bit of both, and I think today we're all supposed to be so bloody happy all the time, and that we are more unhappy than ever. And I think we need some darkness in our lives.
That's it, exactly.
I agree.
And I think, especially with social media, all you see is the good of people's lives. I mean, it's very, very few people post the negatives on there. Obviously, you always get that couple that post their
we
breakups.
also unfriend those guys, right? I mean,
Yeah, we do. Oh no.
But I mean,
Mute.
if you look on Instagram, you only see the good pictures that people have taken. The ones that have taken 30 before and then edited and put a filter on, and they look amazing.
Yes.
But it's like they're the only ones you see. So you live in this world
Yeah.
of only seeing the positivity in everybody. And then you look introspectively at your own life and go, well, why is my life not like that? And I say, well, it's because nobody's fucking life is like that. That's this is a world that people are creating to show everybody else, and they're not going to show you the arguments they're having at home or all the negativity that they're having. So I think that's important for people to remember, and you see that kind of, like you say, that anger and that negativity coming out. We live in a world that seems like it's on football rapid times. I guess even if you look back to the Victorian times, you would have seen animals being butchered in the street. But I think that gives a perspective to people of kind of it is part of life. Not everything is rosy and happy all the time, and I think pretending that it is can lead to some dark places in itself when it eventually does come out.
No, I think it's a great value of extreme metal. It's so important. Just pour everything out. And if you have a really bad day, and I just put on some Slayer, and then I'm just much better. Yeah, it works every time.
I mean, a mosh pit will always get out a little bit of anger as well.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, that's been a while.
That's it. I mean,
It's been too long now.
So Vicky, let's talk a little bit about so you mentioned water as a historical site and also important historical site. I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about with that general area. Water in and of itself, but then we also have not far from there we have Shittingsal, Kirkman as well, the old Viking Age trade port, one of the very important trade ports in that part of Norway. We have Tønsberg as an important medieval city as well, with
The
a
oldest
huge
town in
castle.
Norway.
Yeah. So there are so many things going on right there in that little hotspot. And do you just want to share a little bit about the rich history of that area in general?
It's so many things to explore there, and this is something that we are discussing in the Gospel. How can we give access to our audience to more of this history? Maybe creating packages or offers, before you come, so you can stay there for a bit longer and experience it. And also, there's a lot of things going on right now where with geo radars and modern technology that makes you find new Viking ships and cult houses and longhouses, and I think that in the years to come we will.
What do you ask? I will do my best. How can I help?
nice creatures.
Well, what do we have here? Is that all? Could I lend a hand? Now go have some fun. Queen's blessing.
Our prey cannot escape. O queen and groom.
What shall I craft next? Now where did I put that?
All right, you have my attention. Will that be all? Is the nature of
Yeah, I might continue on later, but I think I'm going to head off very, very soon and just enjoy a little bit of my evening, take a break for about an hour or two, and then I'll come back for some nighttime streaming. Pretty easy does it.
From one sapling, a forest rises.
I might come back to do these dailies, but for now, all is well.
My pleasure. Come back.
Alright, I'm going to put a stop to it here. And with that, I hope everyone has a good rest of your afternoon. I will be back later.